Hey guys, and welcome to the channel. Like a kid waiting for Christmas, I could not sleep last night waiting for this new H2 release, and I have been digging through all the information. So now that we actually have all the official release information on Kawasaki's website, let's dig in to see how it stacks up against the four-seaters of the Polaris Pro R and Maverick Pro R, and dig and see if we can get some insight of what this machine is or isn't before I actually get some seat time at some point. Okay, before we get into a deep dive, let's see what the statement by Kawasaki is as far as what this machine is before we start comparing and figuring out what the machine might also be based off of these details. The all-new Teryx 4 H2 and Teryx 5 H2 high-performance side-by-side are designed for dune and desert domination. The 250 horsepower 999cc inline four-cylinder supercharged engine is harnessed by a CVT and a highly rigid frame complemented by long travel suspension. That's the part you need to really pay attention to. Now, it's obviously designated for dune and desert. They are making that statement there. The thing I'm trying to figure out before it even comes out is, would this also be a good East Coast machine? And how does it stack up against Maverick R, which I'm going to say Mav R, and Polaris Pro R for comparison? Now, first, I do have to give Kawasaki's media people props. I think they could get me excited about buying a moped, to be honest with you. Now, before we get to throwing around the horsepower and weight and those numbers, let's not forget about suspension. Completely important in this category, especially for what it is. Now, the first number is width. It may help you be more stable, but if you can't fit, that's a problem as well. Mav R is the widest out of the group, 78.1, versus the other two both being 74 inches. Now, rarely out of the wheelbase of all three of these, I think you would run across a scenario where it's not enough wheelbase to make something vertical. Now, the longest is the Mav R at 142.5, the Polaris R at 133.5, and the H2 at 126. Now, on the flip side, that shorter wheelbase, especially in the rocks and stuff like that, may stop you from high centering as easy and help you out in some spots, especially if the turning radius is good. Now, the next important number is clearance, especially when you come over like a hump section and potentially high center. Even though Mav R is the longest, it has 17 inches of clearance and the best in the category. H2's max clearance is 16.5, standard is 16.1, and a Pro R is 16 inches, which of course as you change tires and can easily change that with lift kit or other modifications. Now, you can't be the king of the dunes without travel. Now, this is where numbers can easily get confusing for customers, especially the way Polaris does. Now, if we're talking suspension travel for the front, that's where Mav R's king has got 24 inches. Now, suspension travel, H2 would be second at 23.2, followed by Pro R at 22.5. But when you pull up their website, they use a number called usable, and that number is 27 inches. You can watch a couple videos and they'll show you how they go all the way up and then flex down, and they kind of explain it, but it's not an apples comparison compared to suspension travel. There's some arguments and definitely some good videos out there. I want to say it was a shock therapy video that explained this the best. You could have this crazy suspension travel number, but if it hits the skid plate, it's not useful. But if you use usable travel, then depending on the tire, your air pressure, there's a lot of variables that you can kind of flex and make those numbers look really impressive. Now, for rear travel, Pro R does have the best suspension travel numbers at 24.5 versus Mav R and H2 both being 24 inches. Now, Polaris does claim 29 inches of usable travel, but that's not the apples to apples comparison number here. Now, the next spec may not be as important out on the West Coast, out in the dunes doing crazy stuff, but whether you're in the technical stuff out there or on the East Coast or tight trails, turning radius can quickly become important. Now, I did do searches on both the manufacturer's website and then some Google searches, but I could not find turning radius for Pro R or Mav R listed on either of those models. The H2 comes in 24.9 feet, and being the KRX is at 23.3, and I'm not unimpressed or upset about is turning radius. I feel like that might be a sweet spot for the H2 on the East Coast. Now, power doesn't mean anything if you can't stop it. Now, they do have some similarities here. Each have 3 piston calibers in the front and 2 piston calibers in the rear. Now, I couldn't find the Polaris spec, but I feel like I have a hint clue for that. Now, the Mav R has 265 millimeter brakes in the front compared to H2's 270 millimeter. The Mav R in the rear has 255 millimeters compared to the H2's 270 millimeters. Now, I was surprised to see the same brake spec front and back on the H2, but what I think they're doing there is with the accelerator sensors and everything else in the electronics and the live valve and stuff like that. I think they're doing that to have more control over like the pitch and yaw of the machine compared to just a regular traditional braking system where you typically have bigger brakes in the front, but I could be wrong, but I think that's the case. Now, my little hint and why I think the cases with the brake size comes in the tire and wheel categories. Now, the H2 has the biggest tire at 33 inches, and looking at the suspension, I wouldn't be surprised if you couldn't throw at least a 37 on it right out the box. Transmission question still coming in. Now, it has a 16-inch wheel. If you know brakes, you have to have a certain size wheel to handle a certain size brake rotor and caliber. You can tweak the caliber just a little bit, cooling fins and stuff like that for what you need. But at some point, once you have a certain size rotor, you have to have a certain size wheel. Basic mechanicals there. Now, the H2 has a 5 lug. The Mav R has the most lugs at 6, so in theory, that should be the strongest one out of the group there. It drops down to a 32-inch tire, but it has a 16-inch wheel as well. Pro R also has a 5 lug, 32-inch tire, but it has a 15-inch rim. So at some point, that might be the telltale that that one has the smaller braking system out of the group, which compared to a lot of other models, Pro R is still a strong contender in this group as well. Now, where I would love to have upgraded brakes on the KRX, the one thing I hope they're keeping a similarity with comes in the transmission design. Now, if you've watched the channel or know me, I am not a big built fan. The KRX was the first built machine I bought, but I did it for certain reasons. Now, Mav R has a DCT transmission. It, gearing wise, leaves a little bit to be desired in the low, small speed crawling. I think they could have done something a little different there, but I think they were really shooting for that Dune machine, King of the Hammers type thing, and that's what I think they went for. Now, the Pro R has a built just like the H2, but has a dry clutch. Now, the H2, I looked at some of the pictures and stuff, but I'm really hoping we've got a wet clutch for this slow speed engagement that the KRX is great for. Now, power means absolutely nothing if you don't have the corresponding weight. The KRX for a NA machine, naturally expired, wasn't necessarily underperforming, but it was the heavier kit on the playground for that. Now, horsepower wise, Pro R has 225. Next one is Mav R that has 240, and then the H2 has that top number of 250. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't have the corresponding power, potentially transmission hookup or gearing. 2 of those still waiting for the details to come out fully. So the heaviest kit on the playground, dry weight wise, is the Mav R. 2,610 pounds to 2,660 pounds, which is about a 50-pound variance from the models I've seen online. Pro R is the second heaviest kit, from 2,441 pounds to 2,622 pounds. That's a 181-pound variance, which again, as you add equipment, options, stuff like that, it does vary the weight. The H2 is the lightest kit at 2,291 pounds to 2,372.6 pounds, and that's an 81.6 pound variance dry weight. Now, wet weight, the H2 is the only one that gives us the spec there, from 2,425.5 pounds to 2,507 pounds. Now with dry weight, that doesn't include fuel, antifreeze, oil, any of that fun stuff. Let's play around with some numbers there. The smallest gas tank is on the Pro R at 12.3. Second one biggest, which I guess is a good thing depending on how much fuel each one of these uses, is 13.2 of the Mav R. Now the H2 has the biggest fuel tank at 14.8. Now dry weight to wet weight, we're going to use simple math for gas at 6 pounds. At the Pro R 12.3, that puts 73.8 pounds extra in the machine. Mav R 79.2, and the H2 being the biggest gas tank is 88.8. So if we take the Pro R's weight plus that 73.8, at the lightest weight that machine is, that would be at least a wet weight of 2,514 pounds, 0.8. Now, that puts it heavier than any wet weight of the H2, and that's assuming you don't want to put oil, antifreeze, or any of the things that may be factored into a wet weight category. So, yes, the H2 is the lightest machine out of the group with the best horsepower. Now again, the thing I can't say or not say, and Kawi seems to be touting their curve for the CVT transmission. Now if you have paid attention to their CVT trans video, it is kind of bragging about the consistent power curve compared to other models, which is not like Kawasaki to throw out something like that if they don't have an edge or it's a awesome benefit. Now again, the only two numbers we really don't know is the specific details of the transmission and the gearing, but it is, by the numbers, Kawasaki has absolutely come out swinging hard in this category. The highest horsepower, the lightest weight, and the other categories that should matter in a performance-oriented side-by-side market, they're either competitive or leading. So, sound off in your comments. Is this the new big dog? I think it potentially is. Now, whether or not it's a good East Coast machine or tight technical trails, or is this just a Dune model, that's what we'll figure out when we find out if it has a wet clutching or how it's clutched, how it's geared, stuff like that. And I'm hoping this isn't just a strictly Dune machine. I'm really hoping that this is going to be a good all-around use crawler. The size is getting in that in-between category depending on what you like to do. Sound off in the comments what you think, and until the next adventure, hope you have a great one.